Okay, good evening, everybody. Mr. Badi here, and I want to welcome each and every one of us to today's class. Actually, our first class. Sincerely apologize for not having this class last week. We had some network hitch, and that's why we couldn't take it. So, um, political science and country history, and today we'll be looking at the historical background of Nigerian politics. The next 40 minutes will be doing justice to this, and I hope we all can see my screen. So if you have your pen and your paper, let's get set to roll. Historical background of Nigerian politics. So first of all, let's define what historical background means. It simply means it refers to the means of learning about something by considering its origin down to its development and its development. Okay, so we're trying to backtrack to see how Nigerian politics, where it started from and how it has evolved over time. So we want to understand what led to the present political structure that we have in Nigeria, because certain things that happened in the past actually defined where we are right now. Okay, so historical background can also be defined as can also be referred to as the social, religious, economic, and political conditions that existed at a certain time and place. So we're talking about in the early 18th centuries down to the 19th century, and then like that till independence. So we want to see what existed during that period, socially, religiously, economically, and politically. All right, and all those things, like I said, that happened in the time past actually led to what we have today. So that's a brief definition of historical background. So in the course of this lecture, we're going to be looking at the historical background to Nigerian politics. Now, basically, before now, before Nigeria gained independence, we were actually ruled by our colonial masters, which is the British. Okay, colonial masters were the one in charge of administering day-to-day political and economic programs in Nigeria. Now, according to Okafor in 1981, one of his write-up, before the British colonial masters came, Nigeria practiced a sort of an emirate kind of system, emirate system of governance, where different ethnic society or ethnic groups found in the region called the Niger area practice their own kind of system. Now, when I talk about this emirate kind of system, we're talking about a particular ethnic group being governed by the king, okay, in those days called the Obas, the Obis, the emirs, and the rest of them. So you find the emirs in the northern part of the Niger area, the Obas in the western part, and of course the Obis, okay, in the eastern part of Nigeria. So before then, every ethnic group was just on their own as a small settlement, practicing their leader and their traditional institution. Okay. Now, understand something that in this area called the Niger area, there's actually a center, a particular place where most of the economic activities were carried out. And that epicenter is actually Lagos. Even till today now, Lagos is still referred to as the epicenter of the whole country, because most of the economic activities and every other thing is actually carried out from Lagos. Then also the exchange between Nigeria and other countries is also being administered through Lagos. So Lagos was actually the epicenter of economic activities. And then one of the major economic activities that was taking place in Lagos then, according to history, was slave trade. So the slaves, the traders would go into the various regions and then shop for slaves, buy them, and then bring them down to Lagos. Now it was Lagos where they are being, arranged into a boat like that, and then being carried to various countries for sale. Calabar was also another place that was also referred as a trade center, okay, where this kind of trade is being done. but the most of the economic activity actually happened in Lagos. Now, when the British colonial masters came into Nigeria, so there've been so many opinions, okay, of different scholars. Some opined that the reason why the colonial masters came is actually for philanthropic purpose. That is to liberate this area called Niger area from that slave trade. And that's the major reason why they decided to come and then colonize this region, just to be able to stop the slave trade and then to bring about development in form of education and the rest of them. Another opinion opined also that, well, as much as we're going to consider that philanthropic reasons why they came, some say that the major reason why they actually came is to get undue advantage of the resources in Niger area, because they saw Lagos then as a hub, okay, for a lot of economic development. And then even during that time when they came to colonize Nigeria, studies have also shown that UK, the British, the UK countries were actually struggling economically because number one, they didn't have much of resources to sustain, their economy. Number two, there were no much trained people that will be able to bring about this economic development. So that's why they went shopping, in other areas, especially in Africa. They invaded Africa to shop for resources which they can actually return to their country for development. So that is the opinion of some group of scholars. They say that the reason why they actually came to colonize Niger area, which is Nigeria, is actually to tap our resources. And of course, once if they can make their way into Lagos, they can now get undue advantages to other areas in Nigeria. So what happened is that in 1851, just as I have in my slide, in 1851, Lagos came under attack by the British force. Okay, it came under attack by British force. Then, what's his name again? There's somebody that was in charge then. That was actually the Oba of Lagos that was in charge. King Kosoko was the one that was in charge. He was ruling Lagos then. So because of the attack that the British forces came, he was actually defeated, and then that was how they now crowned Lagos as a colony. Okay. Now, some also opine that King Kosoko did not just fight; he couldn't just resist, because there are sometimes when you fight and you see that their power or their strength is much low, you give up. But some people said he didn't even struggle; he just gave it up because there was something that the British already promised him. They promised him a whole lot of things. There were economic underpinnings, okay, that made him give up the seat of authority or seat of power and handed it over to Nigeria. So after that British attack, when the British forces took over Nigeria in 1886, the British Settlement Act of 1843 was now enabled in Nigeria that made Lagos as a colony. So Lagos became a crown colony system of government in Lagos. Okay, so that's just a simple reason. Okay, the simple history of how the British colonial masters came to take over Nigeria. Just like we have in the third slide, they actually came because of the vast resources that stretched beyond not just Lagos but to other areas. That's the reason why they came. So that's how the British colonial masters came to invade Nigeria. Now, the territory of Lagos, like I said, became a British colony in August 6, 1861, when King Kosoko signed the Treaty of Cession. So he seized his power, his authority, his kingdom to the British authority. And that marked the conquest of the area that is now called Nigeria by the British government. Okay? So that's just a brief history of how they came. Now, for us to understand, now when they now came, their power now stretched not just in Lagos, it stretched beyond Lagos, as far as the north and then to the east. So they had a whole lot of power. Now, when the British government took over, like I told you earlier on, Lagos became a colony, which is the western part of Nigeria. Then the northern and the southern became protectorate. Okay? Lagos was the colony because that was where every decision and the government was sitting. Then the southern and the northern part became protectorate. So the British rule in Nigeria then was divided into three: a colony and two protectorates. The colony being in Lagos, and then the two protectorate being the northern protectorate, and of course the southern protectorate. Now, to define for clarification, so understand what colony and protectorate means. Crown colony is actually any region or any area that the British force conquers or takes over or acquire, either through seizure, through purchase, or through conquest. That's fight. So any area that the British authority acquires, intermittently that place becomes a colony. So because Lagos was actually, acquired from King Kosoko, that's why they named that particular place colony. Then the protectorate, like I told you now, then I said the British government fell under three kind of government: the colony and two protectorate. Now, protectorate is actually territory surrounded, okay, to the British by the traditional authorities through treaties. So when they came into Lagos, they started conquering other areas in Nigeria, both the northern, then the southern. They still conquered the northern and the southern part of Nigeria, and those places became protectorate. Okay, and then Anglophone. Anglophone actually describes people who are colonized by the British. They can speak English. That's what Nigeria is referred to as an Anglophone country, because we initially colonized by the British, and they brought their language into Nigeria, so we can speak English. While the Francophone countries, like can here, are those countries that were colonized by the French, okay, forces, and then they introduced French as a language to them. The likes of Senegal, the likes of Cote d'Ivoire, and the rest of them. These are countries that were invaded by France. Then they brought it, so they're referred to as the Francophone countries, while we are referred to as the Anglophone countries. So this is just to clarify those terms in case you hear me use them one after the other. All right, so let's proceed. Now, indirect rule. Now, after Nigeria was colonized, remember I told you Nigeria was colonized by the British forces. Now, between the person who actually brought in indirect rule policy into Nigeria was Lord Lugard. He started reigning in 1906. Okay, 1906, as history would have it. Now, that particular period when he took over from the person that was ruling that time, for him to be able to manage the Niger area because it was so fast, he decided to now introduce an indirect rule in Nigeria in the year 1906, prior to when he assumed authority. Now, indirect rule is a kind of system where the colonial masters, okay, hand over the ruling of their people to the chiefs or the kings in that particular territory, okay. But those chiefs and those kings who are actually ruling the people takes authority from the colonial masters, the British government, which was sitting in Lagos, because you know very well that they cannot be able to cover everywhere. So they have to hand over this power indirectly to these chiefs and these kings, okay, in different communities, and the kings and the chiefs reported back to them as far as trade, economic activities, and the rest of them is concerned. So that was what Lord Lugard did when he assumed power in 1906, to be able to cover the whole Niger area. Because he knows that for him to be able to cover the whole area, it's going to involve a lot of resources. And just like I told you, during that time, England was still, was still struggling economically. So they cannot send the little money they're trying to use to develop their own country, send it down for him to rule Nigeria. So it was easy for him to just introduce indirect rule in Nigeria, where these chiefs and these kings takes care of the governance, but they come under the authority. The chiefs and all those kings come under the authority of Lord Lugard. So that was how the indirect rule was actually introduced in Nigeria. Okay. Now, what were the reasons for indirect rule policy in Nigeria? What were the rules? Why did Lord Lugard, introduce indirect rule in Nigeria? Like I can see there, number one is for administrative convenience. Just like I told you, the size of Nigeria, the size of the Nigeria was too large and too diverse, both in culture, in language, in the rest of them. The diversity in Nigeria was so much, and the population was scattered. It's not that we can say, okay, we have Delta State, this is the population of this state. They were scattered because it was just settlements that you were having in this area. So it was very, very difficult for him to rule administratively. And that's why he had to, for that, because of that, he had to hand over, the administrative duties to these kings and to these traditional rulers then. Okay, that's number one. Number two, when the Lugard came, he met a traditional institution that was working in each of these settlements, and distorting it and introducing a new tradition will be a problem. So he just decided that, okay, since there's already a working traditional institution in these countries, why not we maintain it? And that's one of the major reasons too why he had to now introduce indirect rule and handed over, the administrative duties to these chiefs. But one thing he did was that there were people he appointed in different regions to monitor what was happening. So his own people were also there to monitor what the chiefs and everything were doing, if it's in tandem with what the British government actually brought in. Okay. Now, one of the major challenges that indirect rule really did not work very well in the northern part of the country, because why? We had the emirs there, so there was the traditional system. In the western part, which is the southern part, it worked very well because we had the obas, okay, and the people respected these people. It was only in the eastern part of Nigeria that the indirect rule actually posed a little problem, because even till today, it's very, very difficult for you to enter a state and then see that, okay, and see, or even a community and see that, oh, there's a king who is in charge. No, rather what you have is just heads of clans. So you can have like 10 clans in one community. In each of that clan, they have their own chief. So there's no generalized traditional system where one person exerts the authority, just as you have when you cross over to this place. So, but what he did, because there was no traditional system in place in the East as a single authority in charge of all the communities of the area, what he did was to appoint warrant chiefs then in the eastern part of Nigeria. So the warrant chiefs were actually responsible for the administration in the eastern part of the country. So one of the reasons for indirect rule in Nigeria is for administrative convenience. He didn't want to stress himself because he didn't have the resources and every other reason that we gave. Number two is for economic factor. Economic factor. So at that particular period, UK, which is the British this thing, they were lacking. Okay, just like I told you, there was no much economic boom in the country, and their resources, the human resources, those that will do these jobs, that will engage themselves in different activities to raise the economy of the country, were low. So there's no way the Queen of England would have sent them money, okay, to be able to run to cover the whole country. So that to maximize the little resources that he had to introduce indirect rule, okay, because of the economic factor, okay. So both the money, whatever the community raised for themselves in that community, they sent some part to Lagos to Lagos, and then the other one will not be used to run the affairs of that particular community. So that's the second reason why indirect rule was also introduced in Nigeria. Number three is the language barrier. Like we know, there are diverse ethnic groups in Nigeria, and each of these ethnic groups have their own languages. The language in Nigeria, the ethnic groups are over 250. You understand? And there are thousands of languages, in Nigeria. You can come in a particular state and find up to 12, languages in one state. So that's one of the major challenges that Lugard actually faced that time, the language barrier. So for the people to understand what he wanted from them, they have to meet the chiefs, okay, in charge of those particular communities, so that the chiefs can actually interpret what they wanted. So that's the third reason why indirect rule was actually been introduced in Nigeria. And then, of course, sustenance of African culture, just like I told you, when they came into power, they met a working traditional system of government with rich culture, with diverse ways of living. And they didn't want to, disrupt that particular traditional institute or system. Otherwise, the people may revolt against them, and that would be another problem. That would cause a very big problem for the leaders. So in order to maintain that peace and tranquility, they had to introduce indirect rule just to sustain the African culture. And that's one thing that the Francophone countries lacked. Because one thing that the British did was that when they came into, these African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and the rest of them, they embraced our culture. They even became part of the culture. They were seen practicing our culture, eating our foods, and the rest of them, which the Francophone countries never, gave their own people. They came, abolished all the culture, introduced their culture, which can also be seen in some of these Francophone countries. So these were the four major reasons why indirect rule was actually introduced in Nigeria then. Okay, now assessment of indirect rule. Did it work? Did it not work? What is the assessment of this indirect rule? Just like you have there, the indirect rule was successful in the north and partially successful in the west, but failed in the east, which I already explained to you. That's the assessment that was done on the indirect rule that was actually introduced in Nigeria then. Why did it work in the north and partially in the west? Because the north respected a single authority, which is the emir. So it is easy for the indirect rule to actually work in the north. And then partially in the west, obas. People respected the obas too in the west. Even if in the west, another government, another traditional institution can actually come, overtake the oba, and then install themselves as the oba. So that's why we said it partially worked in the west. But in the north, you dare not, you cannot overthrow the emir. Okay, power is only gotten from him or relieved from him after death when he's dead. But then in the west, anybody can come in and then overthrow the upper and become. So it worked. But in the east, it was a total failure. Just like I told you, there was never a single authority in the east. Rather, you have different clans in a particular community with chiefs and the rest of them. So that was the assessment of indirect rule. And then, like I told you, what Lord Lugard did, because this failed in the east, he appointed warrant chiefs, okay, in different parts of the east to be able to carry on with this indirect rule they actually introduced. So that's a simple assessment of the indirect rule in Nigeria. And what were the merits? The merits of indirect rule? Yes, there are merits, advantages that indirect rule actually brought about. Like number one, the introduction of the system brought about fiscal development. There was a lot of fiscal development. The rate at which people now engage themselves in war, in inter-tribal war, inter-ethnic wars, and the rest of them reduced because there was a lot of economic activities where people can now channel their energy to those things. So the indirect rule actually brought about fiscal development in all those areas. Okay, number two, through the taxes collected from the people, the British officials used part of it to provide and spread Western education, roads, pipe-borne water, and hospitals. Just like I told you, the chiefs or these emirs, these kings that were appointed as the administrators in these various communities were mandated to collect tax from the people. So when they collect tax from the people, like I said, they send part of the tax that was accrued, that was collected to the British government in Lagos, and then the other part, the other percentage was actually used to provide them education, to provide roads, pipe-borne water, and of course, hospital. Then number three, um, it opened up many rural communities to economic activities, resulting in farm produce being exported and local consumption. So the money that was realized from the taxes paid by the people were used to construct roads. And once these roads are constructed, the farmers, the agriculturists can now move their farm products from the rural communities down to other communities. Even most of them were also exported. and this also improved the economy of Nigeria as at then. So that's also another merit or advantage of indirect rule then in Nigeria. The number 4, the system also taught traditional rulers the art of modern administration. They had no choice than to learn, okay, how to govern, not just the traditional method of governance, but the modern administrative method. So each of these kings and warrant chiefs that were, given this responsibility were held accountable of public fund. They were held accountable for public fund. So the system brought about this, okay, the art of modern administration, the rest of them. Then another merit of indirect rule is that during this period could be regarded as the zenith of relevance of the traditional history because monarchs were made to play the roles of politicians, and thus, because of that, they were also involved in decision making and the rest of them. So they became politicians. These are our kings and the obas and the emirs became politicians. They were basically doing everything as far as admission is concerned. So they rose to the zenith, to the peak of relevance in their community. So people were having 80% respect for them. Now it grew to 100% because they are like everything now. So that's also another thing that the indirect rule actually brought to Nigeria. There are more. Okay, it also brought about civic obligations and consciousness. Okay, there was introduction of a modern judicial system for adjudication, arbitration of disputes between individuals, communities, and traditional institutions. So what I mean is that the indirect rule set up a whole lot of things. There was a judicial system that was set up. So when there was a problem between individuals or communities or people fighting over something, there's a judicial system where your case will be tried and then the judgment will be given. Civic obligations, meaning what are your responsibilities, obligations as a citizen, what are you supposed to do? These were certain things, some of the things that the traditional indirect rule also brought in Nigeria. Okay. The next point is preserve the native customs, laws, and traditions. Just like I told you, because this British government came and saw that there's a working traditional institution with diverse customs, laws, traditions, and culture. So through there, they were able to rule peacefully and amicably, and the people respected what they wanted. So indirect rule actually helped to also preserve what they met when they came. All right. So those are some of the merits or the advantages of indirect rule. But also remember, there is nothing that have merit that doesn't have demerit or disadvantage. So we're going to look at the demerits of indirect rule. Now, so many persons have really opined that apart from these merits, these advantages that we talked about that indirect rule brought, there were also other things, other disadvantages that this indirect rule brought. Number one, just like we said, they handed over the power to these kings and these obas and the emirs to actually, take charge. But indirectly, they were the ones in charge because even the kings no longer have a say of their own. They tell the people what the British government tells them to say. So they no longer have the power. They no longer have the say of their own. So that's one of the major things. So they were reduced to puppets, according to some persons. Okay, that's one of the major things that indirect rule brought about. So these kings and the obas and the emirs no longer have a word of their own, the say of their own. They were actually doing the dealings of these colonial masters. Okay, so indirectly they were the one ruling in those communities. So those kings and they were just there as a figurehead. Okay, because they were actually doing what they were asked to do. Okay, number two disadvantage of indirect rule is that there were some elites, African elites, that's those who were educated, they were alienated from government. Imagine handing over powers to illiterates, which are the kings and these obas and the rest of them. For those who actually went to school, that were supposed to be, in position of all these things, they were denied of this particular thing, and they handed it over. So imagine them not taking authority from, these local chiefs and the rest of them, rather than these elite African elites being in charge. So that becomes the second disadvantage of this indirect rule. Okay, so also another thing is that these kings and the emirs and the warrant chiefs that were appointed by Lord Lugard, they were given enormous power to the extent that this power started shacking, like it started intoxicating them. They can now use it anyhow they like. You understand? So the respect that naturally the traditional system accorded them added more again. This power given to them by the British colonial masters now made them so powerful that nobody can say whatever. Okay, so they were accorded more than what they were supposed to have in terms of power. So that's another thing. So they became bullies. They became too powerful for the people. They can now control and do whatever. Because if you disobey any of their rules, they have the soldiers and the rest of them to flog you and deal with you and the rest of them. So the power became too much for these traditional rulers that they started making, abusing it. Just like we have this arbitrary use of power by these traditional rulers, they started now invading communities, smaller communities, taking their wives, taking their lands, taking chieftaincy titles, giving chieftaincy titles to who they wish to give, even when you're not qualified to receive chieftaincy titles. So they were misusing and abusing their power. They can do whatever because at that point, nobody could talk to them and tell them what to do and the rest of them. Then the myth and the sacredness of these traditional rulers disappeared. What do you mean by myth and sacredness? Sacredness. When you are a king, there are certain things you don't do. For example, you don't get to see a king except when there's a special festival or occasion, maybe New Year festival or those the traditional festival. So the king comes out once in a while, once in a blue moon. Sometimes you get to see the king once in a year. And then that time, because of not seeing the king, is always a very special occasion. People dress, come out to see the KBAC and these kings and the rest. Then boy disappeared when this government came and handed over the power. So you can see the king walking up and down like that, giving authorities, and which was not supposed to be. So the sacredness disappeared completely. Normally the king decrees a thing. You don't hear it from the king's mouth. There's a town crier, there's a palace, spokesman that disseminates the king's information. And the town criers goes to the communities and then they tell you once they are done, they said the king has pronounced. Bang, 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 bang. But now the king walk around the streets disseminating information because they cannot afford to stay in their place. They are being monitored by these colonial masters. So they're expected to leave their higher place of abode to meet the people, to actually govern these people one-on-one. So the tradition of some traditional beliefs was lost through this indirect rule that it brought about in Nigeria. So those are the demerits that this government, this indirect rule actually brought to Nigeria. Okay, so because of these disadvantages, now these demerits of indirect rule, and the fact that Lord Lugard had a very big problem, okay, trying to cover the vast land of Nigeria because of these, hinterlands and suburbs and then settlements you find in different areas. There was now need to bring Nigeria under one single umbrella. And that was what brought about the amalgamation of Nigeria in 1914. So there was need now to unite the northern and the southern part of Nigeria to become as one. Okay, and that was what brought about the amalgamation of Nigeria in 1914. All right, so in our next class, because this part of the story of this history of Nigeria is so interesting that if I decide to dive into it now, it's going to take us a whole long time. I have about 2 minutes to end this class. So just know that when we come next week Monday, we will look at the amalgamation of 1914, the intrigues, the different opinions of the scholars, the history scholars, what their own feeling or what they believed was the reason for the amalgamation. So there've been a lot of opinions about that. So we're going to discuss the amalgamation of 1914, how the first institution, was actually put in place and the rest of them. So those are the things we're going to be looking at when we come next week. So to summarize the class, what we've discussed today, we looked at, we started from defining what historical background is. And we said historical background has to do with studying the economic, the traditional, the social, and the religious belief of people in the time past. And we said one of the major reasons or one of the major advantages of studying this historical background is that what Nigeria is today is as a result of these things that were practiced in the time past. And we tried to create that in 1806, in the 18th century, the British colonial masters invaded Nigeria through their British force. Some said they came because of philanthropic purposes, just like we said. They want to, they want to save Nigeria from the slave trade. And we identified that Lagos and Calabar were the two major hubs where this trade was done. Then other scholars said, no, they did not just come to abolish the slave trade. They had a special interest in Nigeria because of the vast resources that they found in Nigeria area. Okay, and then to make the invasion or bombardment easy, they had to meet the king of Lagos, King Kosoko then, and then bribed him with a lot of economic benefits and the rest of it. They promised him a huge amount of money and the rest of them so it was easy for King Kosoko to just hand over power to them. And that was how Nigeria came under the rule of our colonial master, which is the Britain. And we said over time, what they call it now, when Lord Lugard took over in 1906, he introduced indirect rule in Nigeria because of the many challenges he saw in Nigeria when he came. So for him to be able to cover the large area of Nigeria, he had to introduce, the indirect rule in Nigeria, handing over this power to these kings and the obas. They were the one actually administering in that particular communities, but indirectly, Lugard was in charge, but he was one that was giving them the instructions. So we also discussed the advantages and of course the disadvantages. So those are the things we looked at today. So hopefully when we come next week, Monday, we'll look at the amalgamation of 1914. Thank you so much for participating in this class, and I will see us next week. Thank you very much.